Just ahead on American Black Journal, the unveiling of a landmark sculpture at the Charles H. Wright Museum kicks off a special year-long commemoration. We'll have the details. Plus, a Detroit history maker tells his story of breaking racial barriers in the auto industry. Stay right there. American Black Journal starts now.
American Black Journal is funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first.
How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. The Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History is kicking off a year-long commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Detroit Rebellion with a very special piece of art. The landmark sculpture named United We Stand is going to be unveiled at a community reunion at the museum on July 23rd. It's the latest piece of incredible work by legendary Detroit artist Charles McGee.
Something's happening here. You see a lot of construction. It's a magnificent thing to see because I know Detroit as having really hit bottom. I was very, very, very surprised to see how far the city's come back. It changes the cadence of life for everybody, but it put it on a different pitch.
The Charles Wright Museum is working with Charles McGee to create a 40 by 20 feet sculpture entitled United We Stand, which will be a commemoration for the 1967 rebellion in Detroit.
Several people I know were killed during that riot. We don't know what good is unless we have bad, you know. It was in the 43, that one was pretty bad. They really tore up Hastings Street. It was one of my great influences in trying to learn art, bettering my condition so that I could compete in the world, you know.
The rebellion of '67 had a tremendous impact on the changes in equity as it happened in Detroit.
I opened my own gallery, Gallery 7. I convinced black artists that I knew to assist me so that we could have a school in there and a gallery all in one situation. We got the artists to teach the classes. Everything was free. Suburbia were bringing their kids to my gallery. This helped to create that sort of a mecca.
This is a tremendous project for the museum and for the city of Detroit, and I am so appreciative that the Joyce Foundation has stepped forward to see this as something that's worthy of their support.
As you can see, this was born in the last couple of months. One thing I noticed about the human brain, if you can't do something, you can do something else, or you can change the methodology. That's what's happening to me now. I'm 91. My body is older, but I'm still thinking and still producing.
And joining me now is the museum's president and CEO, Juanita Moore. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for the
Yeah,
invitation.
what a wonderful idea. A legendary Detroit artist, a legendary Detroit museum, the 50th anniversary of a very pivotal moment in our history. You get them all together and you come up with this wonderful sculpture that's going to, I said to you earlier, I haven't seen it, but I imagine that this is going to really change the way people see and interact with just the idea of the museum.
Absolutely. It's going to change the landscape. But isn't it amazing?
Yeah,
It's
no,
fabulous.
it's
And
really a
for
wonderful.
him, at 91, he's
Right,
just...
still producing, as he says, right?
And I really wish I could take credit for it, but I mean, it has really been all of his idea
Yeah.
and all of his concept. He's been wanting to do this for quite some time, and you know, he has worked all around this city, including an amazing piece in the museum already.
Yes.
But to have this 20 by 20 sculpture outside of the museum that you can see from Warren and you know from all sides of the museum, it's going to be just an amazing piece. And
Yeah.
so we're really excited about it.
Talk about the theme of the piece. I think that's really important. United we stand. Certainly that was not where we were at the end of the rebellion in 1967. This was a very divided community. There have been so many efforts since then to try to heal that divide, bridge that gap. United we stand today says we've come somewhere. We've gotten to a place where we want to celebrate that.
And exactly where we want to go and
Yeah.
where we want to be.
Right.
And you know, just listening to Charles McGee and hear him talk about the fact that he had this studio and people from the suburbs and people from the city would all bring their children there. So that's the concept of his life.
Yeah.
So for him to have this concept of wanting to do this and wanting to do it for quite some time now.
Yeah.
And it has taken this journey for us to even get to be able to implement his dream and his vision to have the piece produced and installed at the museum. And it, you know, everything happens at the time it's supposed to happen.
Yeah, right.
And for it to be able to celebrate commemorate the 50th anniversary of the '67 rebellion at this point, and with a theme that is so important and so present and so contemporary for everything that's happened now and happened in '67 is just fabulous and amazing.
Yeah. So July 23rd is the date that we'll have the installation. That is the date of the rebellion in
Absolutely.
1967.
Yeah.
But it kicks off a year of commemoration of this 50th year of the rebellion. Talk about how this fits in with the other thing. I know the museum is doing a lot. Lots of museums are involved.
Yes,
right?
lots of organizations around the city, you know, will be commemorating and really help us to think and rethink and to help us really shape the future and sort of really, hopefully, around this theme, Charles McGee's theme, that United We Stand. And to have this unveiling of this sculpture and then followed by an invitation for people to come and have this sort of everybody to come and spend this time not only unveiling the sculpture but having a conversation and about what we can do together and how we can move forward together is really important, and that's what we expect to do the day of the 23rd at the museum.
Sort of convene this
Yes.
conversation
Yes, this
with
homecoming
people
piece,
of our
if you will.
community.
People coming back, and we've had some amazing performers and entertainers and artists, because you know the arts really help us do that better than anything else. Help us come together and have conversations about what we can be together. And so we have spoken word artists, we have performers, we have Arabs, African Americans, Hispanics, everybody
Really
coming,
broad.
very, very broad.
One of the
Old,
things-
young,
yeah.
Coming to perform. We have, African drummers. We have many of the Kresge eminent artists. He is a Kresge eminent artist,
Sure.
and we have other Kresge eminent artists that will be performing as well as the Kresge Arts recipients that will be performing. So Kresge is a big part of this,
Right.
and so is the Joyce Foundation, which is
Right.
the major funder
For the
this
sculpture.
sculpture.
Yeah,
So we are really, really pleased and very happy with the foundation community that has really helped us to be able to do this.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've been really struck by with all of the planning around the 50th anniversary of the rebellion is this idea of how broadly the community is being included in it. And you're just talking about the number of different communities that will be represented at this statue unveiling. It really reminds us that this is about everybody. This is about all of us in this community. A lot of times I think it's hard to get people to see that. They think this is a black thing or a black-white thing. This is a community that's really, really diverse, and everybody has a role to play and a contribution to make.
And I think that's important to say and to actualize, and that's why we wanted to do this program, and to kick it off with with Charles McGee being the center of this, a 91-year-old artist who has spent his life from Detroit, that has spent his life really using the arts to help bring people together. Is such a key moment, and it's such a key thing to have at a moment like this. And I think that we're continuing to not only just do that, but inside the museum, we're going to we have an exhibit on the Olympics, and we know that especially the '68 Olympics played a major role in looking at race relations and human rights issues around the world, and happened at the Olympics. So we will have an Olympian that will come in and actually give a tour of this exhibition and sort of talk about the role of the Olympics and how not just the arts and sports together have been able to really help bring people together and help us put light on issues that we need to talk about and really try to solve these problems together.
Of course, this is happening at a time when we are reminded again of the challenges that we have in this society with regard to race and racism, the things that we're seeing on our phones and on the desktop and on the television. Talk about the way that you guys at the museum, sort of this cultural hub of the African American existence here in Detroit, talk about when things like this happen, what it feels like at the museum, and what sort of inspires you guys in terms of the way that you feel like you're either conveners or responders to what's happening.
For us, it feels like opportunity. It feels like a wonderful opportunity. Although although the challenge is there, it is also an opportunity to bring attention to and educate. And so with even the commemoration of the 67, we would start to educate people with going back to Nat Turner and the understanding that people have been trying to create change in this country for quite some time.
For a very long time.
And it has been, and it was part of the Constitution, it was part of the Bill of Rights, it was part of what this country was founded on. The right to have a voice, any individual voice, speak up and speak out against what change should happen in injustices. And so I think, it started back with the Boston Tea Party. And so we want people to understand that is part of the right of democracy, that a single person, a single voice can make a difference. And so we start with that by having taken the opportunity to teach and to use history to help us move forward and help us to see the vision for the future and help us show how any individual, whether you're rich, poor, black, white, whatever, you have the opportunity and the obligation to speak up and help make change for the better and help change people's lives, which is the same thing that happened in the civil rights movement. Then when a group of people, individuals that weren't rich, weren't poor, who were not rich, not powerful, changed the way every single person, not only in this country lives today, but impacted human rights movements around the world.
Around the world,
And so we want to use those opportunities to bring people together, to have those conversations, to help them understand that they also can do the same.
They have a role to play.
They have a role to play, and you have an
Ordinary
obligation.
People. That's right. Wonderful opportunity to do that next weekend, July 23rd at the museum with the unveiling of this wonderful statue.
And what better way to start with than to start with the arts?
Yes, that's right. All right, thanks very much for being here.
My pleasure.
Up next on American Black Journal, I'll talk with a man who made history at the Ford Motor Company. But first, here's a look at some important moments in Detroit's black history.
I'm Ken Coleman with a look back at African American life in Detroit.
This week in 2001, Stevie Wonder headlined the Detroit 300 celebration at Hart Plaza. In 1967, a civil disturbance was set off after police raided an after-hours bar on the city's west side. And in 1967, Reflections by Diana Ross and the Supremes was released by Motown Records.
Through the mirror of my mind, time after time, I see reflections of you and me. Reflections of the way life used to be. Reflections of the love you took from me.
These are significant events this week in Detroit's Black history, taken from the book On This Day, African American Life in Detroit.
As we continue our ongoing look at Black history makers here in the Detroit area, my next guest has the distinction of being the first African-American vice president at the Ford Motor Company. Prior to that historic position, his expertise in the field of law led him to become corporation counsel for the city of Detroit during the Coleman Young administration, and as a defense attorney, he represented the Black Panther Party during the racially charged 1960s and 70s. I am pleased to welcome Elliott Hall to American Black Journal. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Stephen, for having me. Appreciate it.
I would be remiss if I didn't start this conversation with your history representing the Black Panthers, that movement of resistance against white abuse and authority over African Americans. We're reminded right now of how important that movement was and how important your work was in legally defending them.
Yes. Well, the Black Panthers had a very educated, almost academic approach to how they were going to deal with racism. They knew the problems within the system, and they wanted an armed resistance as opposed to the Martin Luther King method of nonviolence. And they were arrested with impunity in downtown Detroit for selling their newspapers around Hudson's and some of the big stores down there. And as a result, I got involved as a young lawyer starting in late 1966, early 67, before the riots, with representing them in Recorder's Court in the city of Detroit. And I was very impressed with some of those young men and women.
And they were being arrested for distributing a newspaper, which,
Precisely.
you know, our First Amendment to the Constitution says you ought to be able to do that. No matter what it says, you ought to be able to share your ideas freely, and yet they were being
well, they didn't want them doing it in front of the J.L. Hudson Company. That was you can go over and
go do it somewhere else,
but not in downtown Detroit at that time, which was still largely a white city in 1966 and 67. So as a result, the escalation of the Panthers in Detroit and throughout the country just continued to grow.
So you go from there to the Coleman Young administration, not too many years later, as someone whose relatives were also involved in that early ascendance of Black political power here in Detroit. I've heard lots of stories about what that was like. Talk about what it looked like from your seat. Corp Counsel, a very important position in the administration.
Well, at the time Coleman Young was elected in 1973, we had, the police were depicted as an occupying army in the city of Detroit. We had this stress operation, Stop the Robberies, and Joy Safe Streets, that had really separated even more widely the Black and white community. And there were still in 1973, 74, very few defined Black neighborhoods outside of Black Bottom was about gone then. We were around the Dexter area and the west side of Detroit. Palmerwood, Sherwood Forest, Roosevelt Park was still largely
These were white neighborhoods.
White neighborhoods. So when Coleman Young was elected and I was appointed corporation counsel, one of the first things we wanted to do was integrate the upper levels of the Detroit Police Department and the Detroit Fire Department. It was easier to do it with the Detroit Police Department. Detroit Fire Department was a little tougher because men lived together with the fire department. You sleep overnight with one another because they work 48 hours on, 48 hours off. So it was a more difficult, but that process, we finally got it through after some struggles.
And we talk about Detroit today and the way it looks and the way that there's almost an unfettered path for African Americans to be successful in politics and business here in a way that you see that's very different from other cities. It traces back to the things that were done in the early 70s.
Oh my, indeed. I remember, Stephen, when we had a black superintendent of schools. Coleman Young was the mayor. We had Irma Henderson was president of the city council.
Right.
So we saw some real progress happen over a very short period of time. But one of the reasons that happened is there was a rapid exodus of the white population.
Of the white population, that's a great point.
From the city.
Yeah.
And as a result, you know, the voting power of black people in the city expanded. But the unfortunate thing is that whites moved out in large numbers, and that destroyed the tax base of the city.
Sure.
One of the things that I was always disturbed about was we had nobody in the watchtower when they decided to build all of the expressways in the city. Detroit tore up the city.
It tore up the city, tore up
Indeed.
black neighborhoods in particular.
Well, that never happened in Washington, D.C., where they have the expressway goes around, the
Right.
beltway goes around.
Right.
They didn't go through the city. But we started with the Ford, then they did the Lodge,
Right.
then they did 75, then they did 96, just tearing up commercial establishments.
5 major freeways.
Absolutely.
Cutting through the
And
city.
that really helped destroy the city.
Talk about your transition from politics to the Ford Motor Company, where you also broke a lot of barriers.
Well, the interesting thing about Ford Motor Company is my dad worked at Ford. He started Ford in 1918, and in 1957 he worked in the furnace room and the foundry.
Yeah, right.
So my task in life from my dad was, you don't want to do that work.
You don't want to work in the
You don't want to
foundry,
do that
right?
work. You got to go to school.
I think that was a pretty
gotta,
common message
Yes.
from African Americans of one era to the next in the auto industry.
That's correct. Well, one of my clients, when I joined the firm of Dykeman, one of the clients that I acquired was the Ford Motor Company, and we tried a rather significant employment lawsuit, and I got to know the general counsel of the company fairly well. We were able to prevail in the lawsuit, and after the suit was over, he called me one evening in my office. I'm not the rinse in, and says, "Oh, I'm interested in talking to you about a position we have open in Washington, running our Washington Affairs office." And general counsel at the time, God rest his soul, was Hank Nolte, a very dear friend. I had lunch with him the next day, and the rest was history. I was appointed. I moved lock, stock, and barrel from Detroit to Washington to take over the Washington Affairs office and do the lobbying for the Ford Motor Company.
Yeah, yeah. And this was a time when African Americans weren't in leadership positions in that company.
That's true. And when I hit Washington, you will understand this. Everybody knew I was coming.
Right,
this black guy
right.
from Detroit is coming to head a major corporate office. And as a result, it made my job a lot easier, because when you're doing a lobbying job for a company like Ford, and we had plants in 19 states, so I wanted to make contact with the senators and the representatives from all those states to sort of get our agenda and some of our work done. So it made my job a great deal easier.
Yeah, yeah. What was the reaction inside of Ford at that time, though, to the idea of an African American getting such an assignment?
Well, having the support of the chairman at the time, Don Peterson, and the general counsel, Hank Nolte, was very helpful.
Yeah.
So it smoothed the path in a lot of respects. But there are a few that resented the fact that I was there, because I came in off the street as a vice president. I didn't come up through the ranks within the company like most of the officers of the company. So there was some resentment. But you know, being a black man in America, if you want to succeed, you have to ignore obstacles. You have to step over them and keep moving. You cannot be deterred by them. So, but having help and support was very helpful.
Yeah. You have a son and a grandson who are both here in Detroit, living in a different time. We've got about a minute left. Talk about the challenges you still see for blacks in Detroit.
Well, the unfortunate thing about Detroit and America, for that matter, is how racism always develops in different forms, in different eras, you know.
Sort of morphs.
You know, you go through the early part, you get from slavery, then you get to the period where, you know, the schools were desegregated. You get to the point where, okay, well, let's hire blacks within our major companies. But then it rises like today in a different form, where there is resentment of black youth by authorities in the streets.
Sure.
And it's just another reflection of how this ball of racism continues to roll down the field and never seems to disappear.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate, you know?
Yeah, but as you said, you always got to keep stepping over it.
Step
Go
over
through the
it and
obstacles.
keep going. Absolutely,
All
absolutely.
right, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Stephen.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. One quick program note before we say goodbye. American Black Journal is going on the road later this month. Make sure you join us on Wednesday, July 27th at 7:30 p.m. for a special live broadcast and web stream from Focus Hope in Detroit. We're teaming up with One Detroit to talk about the state of race relations and the issues that arise because of racial attitudes. It's a topic that is dominating the headlines after the recent police shootings of black men and the killing of officers in Dallas. So mark your calendars. You don't want to miss this very important conversation. That's our program for today. Thanks for watching. You can get more information about our guests at AmericanBlackJournal.org. Plus, you can connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter. We'll see you next time.
American Black Journal is funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first.
How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.